caashaqo wehelkaygi weeyaan wilayga beeriyo wadnaqaygi weeyaan wale aniga caashaqo wehelkaygi weeyaan wilayga beeriyo wadnaqaygi weeyaan wixii ka sheegtanaan iskumaba wanaagsan wixii ka sheegtanaan iskumaba wanaagsan.
Hello, everybody. Assalamu alaikum. I hope everyone is doing good on this wonderful. I live near an airport, and you might have just heard an airplane fly over me. Okay. So I hope you are doing well on this wonderful Sunday afternoon, evening, nighttime, wherever you may be in the world. Welcome to Udgon 7. I'm your host, as always, Udgon, Ifrah Udgon. Sometimes you might have a different host in the near future. Just keep out for that. But I am your host. Welcome. And I'm really glad that you guys are here. We are working with Amira to come on. So please give us a moment. We're working on Amira to come on, and we really have an exciting conversation today, discussion on colorism and skin bleaching. It's just really important. It's really important in terms of health and societal, issues. So here comes our wonderful Amira. Amira, welcome. How are you?
Hi, Ifrah. Good. How are you doing?
I'm really good, Abaya. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you. I know you are incredibly busy, so I'm really honored. And we are all honored, that you are here with us. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Abaya, for having me in your space.
I really appreciate it. Amira, you have done, so much incredible work, and we have shared the bio, but hearing it from you would be really wonderful. Who is Amira? Tell us about who you are and the work that you do and what you're passionate about. What drives you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. Again, hi, everybody. My name is Amira Adawe. I am a public health practitioner and a researcher. Currently, I am the executive director of the Beautywell project, a nonprofit that I found that focuses on combating colorism and skin lightening issues, but also empowering communities to own their health and well-being. So that's the work that I do. My background, I worked in government for 15 years, both local, state, and executive level, working for a governor, leading the children's cabinet for a governor. So my background is in public health, and I am based in Minnesota, but the work that we do has a global outreach as well.
Awesome. I'm really excited to hear that. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. On your work in terms of skin bleaching, I believe from what I have read and heard, it's very misunderstood. Can you tell us a little bit about what is colorism?
Mm-hmm. So basically, the simplest term of defining colorism is a discrimination against skin color, and that is within groups and outside of groups. So when I say within groups, within your family members or within your culture groups that are in your culture that always may be commenting on your skin color or the way your hair looks. So that is basically colorism within groups. But outside groups, we see that manifest within systems. Systems that hire Black people or brown people, especially it impacts Black people because colorism is basically deeply rooted anti-Blackness, and so it predominantly impacts Black people, but absolutely also other people of color also experience colorism. And so, and it's a deeply rooted systems, whether it's in the United States or globally. Systems of education systems have so much colorism. Healthcare, so it's really embedded in these cultures and systems, And yeah, and so that's why it will take for a while to really do these type of practices.
I understand completely. It's incredibly devastating, the kind of damage that colorism, anti-Blackness does, and to look at it beyond, the kind of comments that family members might say. I remember when I was growing up, nobody really commented on my skin color per se, but I would remember some of the members of my family being praised for their lighter skin, and some members of my family being kind of condemned for their darker skin, being called Hevel Adomo or Heblaya Adome, just kind of, hinting at that anti-Blackness. And it has really devastating, kind of effects mentally on a human being. But we're like also looking at it like a broader, like social level, political level, the kind of ramifications that it has. So you've touched a little bit on, like, in terms of jobs, in terms of educational expectation, how it can be a health, determinant. It's multifaceted and it's very insidious and makes it really difficult to tackle. What are some things that you've done to tackle this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've been doing this work now for 10 years, and so focusing on systems, actually, how does even systems work on this issue in terms of skin lighting, through advocacy, working with both state and even different states, their legislatures, and federal. Most recently, we advocated for federal legislation to have FDA actually regulate these products, because FDA does not have any aggressive regulatory system. In fact, they have not even banned some of these toxic ingredients. So yeah, we were working with our congressional delegates to come up with legislations to address this. So in August this year, Congress passed legislation that will mandate FDA to regulate these products, but that's still sitting with the Senate. And so hopefully the Senate will pass, but it needs like all of you to call. So your listeners, those who are in the United States, I hope that they can call their U.S. senators and urge them to pass that legislation. And it's under agriculture and FDA appropriation bill, which will help. So see, these are some of the things that I've been doing, but also researching. Last 10 years, I've been doing community-based participatory research to make sure that impacted communities or those who have lived experience participate in the solution process, to make sure that we collect their information, listen to them, and even myself learning from them, because you can't, as a researcher, most of the time I wear learning hats. So I have to learn from them in order to really effectively address too. So we have been doing that research last 10 years, but also now clinical research is biomonitoring, looking into like biomarkers like blood and also urine samples to see if there's mercury exposure happening communities. And we're seeing that, so it's not us only saying that mercury is toxic, but we're seeing clinically how it's impacting them. And then now we are going to start soon national research in partnership with Oxy University in California to look to different states about different communities that practice skin lighting and collecting information from them. And then now with my fellowship, thanks to Bush Foundation.
Yes, congratulations.
Thank you. It focuses on globally looking into how cosmetic companies are marketing to low-income and middle-income countries. And so so that will help us to scale our work into a global settings, not only scale and
Now I realize that it's multiple levels, right? So investigating how this impacts like systems and investigating how to strategically plan on how to learn about how the system works and how to change this. It looks like a lot of work.
Yes,
It is a lot of work.
Right.
Right. And I can only imagine, the kind of pushback that you get from that, where people tend to minimize the ramifications of this. It's not a big deal.
Yeah,
Like what a person wants to do. So looking at it from that health angle as well, I find it very fascinating. It is a health issue, but sometimes people buy into it when we say it's a health issue and we have evidence that it's a health issue, right?
Yeah, but also the thing is that I'm a trained public health person, and so in the beginning when I started this work, I was wearing the public health hat, and then when I've seen the this is in public health mostly what we do is behavioral change, and so when you approach these type of communities that have had lived trauma experiences of colorism for years and years, we have to go beyond public health. We have to, which is still it's a public health. We have to get into the root causes, and then from there on heal them. And so that's one of the approaches that we take of redefining beauty, because standards now are only you're only considered beautiful if you're lighter skin, and that in our culture. And we don't only work with Somalis, we work with all communities that impacted by skin lighting issues or colorism. But the Somalis are the most I think kind of difficult to change their behaviors when it comes to health related thing.
That's very interesting. What are some of the cultural things, right? So you mentioned about redefining beauty. What are like some of the cultural things that lead, which I believe now mostly it's women and girls that bleach, although I have heard that men also bleach, but it's predominantly women and girls that do. So what are some things in our culture that lead to girls bleaching their skin?
You were just earlier talking about how people comment on others, their skin, or call them names. I mean, that's a classic example of impacting somebody's self-esteem. And all of us, we're different. The way we regulate our feelings, what we think of doing when our self-esteem gets damaged. And especially when you're very young, you need a support system, and that support system is not in place for someone, because whether you are a 40-year-old or a 14-year-old, everybody talks about your skin or your hair. You're not wearing hijab, like your hair. So it's like there's always comments towards the individual,
Yes.
And so I think a lot of times people internalize that, and so that's also the manifestation that we're seeing people practice skin lighting. But also this has been in our culture for many years, and so even those who are making these comments, they don't mean in a harmful way. It's coming from a place of what they have learned, their lived experience, and so these are some of the toxic, harmful practices of within the culture that we need to undo. A lot of things in our culture, it's not so good. We need to learn to undo these cultures and see how we can adapt into like a positive things. And that is also gets to positive parenting, and how we even talk to our young girls. Are we listening to them? So these are the things that like we can do. So in terms of like why Somali women do use skin lighting practice, it gets to these cultural things, but also within the women, amongst women, there's also this culture that most of the women, the Somalis that participated in our research, talked about, like, if they go to weddings, always people talk about them, you know, oh, Heblayo, you know, her skin looks different. Maybe she's not using this type of product. So amongst women, they influence each other.
Yeah.
That's very common amongst Somalis, but not so common with the other groups that we work with.
So there is a focus on it's madaqin, you know, you don't you didn't do this, so therefore there's like a social implication, right? That's like very immediate, you know, as you're living in the society, you receive these comments and like you said, you internalize it. Speaking of weddings, one time I was going to a wedding and this lady who was a friend of my aunt asked me if I had makeup, right? So I looked at her skin color, I looked at mine, I was like, oh, she's, you know, around my skin color. I gave her my makeup and she was like, what is this, you know? And I was like, it's foundation, like it, and she was like, why is it so dark? And I was like, because it's matches our skin, it's supposed to match our skin. And she's like, and I'm like, no, I don't. You know? But it's like these awkward situations.
Yeah, it's very common.
And it's like the heart of the situation, it's like these interactions that make a difference because they're interactions and then they compound, right? And then they become a social phenomenon.
Yes. So what you see is accumulated impacts in the Somalis. And I think, you know, women experience so many things in life. You know, our body experiences so many things, you know. That's why the issue that we do is also a reproductive justice issue. You know, it you know, like we go through so much reproductive health issues, whether it's, you know, like when we're young or even when we're having kids. And then there are also other stressors in the family that women experience added to this. So they have never went through a healing process. And when I talk about the work that we do or the work we do, we don't come from in a blaming them space. We come from a place of how do we reform this society, the cultures that we have. Because not they just, you know, like nobody will just wake up one day and say, you know, I have colorism issue, I need a skin lighting. It's on an issue that we need to change the society of how we view women culture and what we expect from them. So that these are, if we want the individuals to change, we also have to have the community-wide to change and accept them.
Absolutely. And they're very interconnected, right? Because people, we're social creatures. As we're growing, we're watching other people for what are acceptable behaviors, for our particular community. And this is a community that I belong to. So what is acceptable behavior so that I can belong? And it goes beyond like the individual behavior. So a lot of times when we discuss like social issues, I find that people get fixated on the individual behavior, right? But it's not so much individual behavior. Sure, an individual behavior has impact, but when that behavior becomes a lot of people partake in this, then it becomes a social or cultural phenomenon. There's some comments here saying that basically we have the most beautiful culture. What are you saying, Amira? Can you talk a little bit about how culture is not one thing? There are many things that comprise of a culture.
Yeah, so first of all, I have that same culture that they have. I'm Somali, fully Somali. So, well, when I talk about culture, yes, we do have a good culture, but the culture that promotes only light-skinned women, it's not a culture. We need to dismantle that culture. That's a hard practice culture that we should not be accepting.
And that's the thing, right? When people just focus on like, this is our culture is beautiful. And although some parts of it could be beautiful, doesn't mean that everything is perfect. How do we challenge the imperfect portions, as we are just human beings and we're imperfect by nature? How do we challenge like the imperfect aspects of our culture and say, you know, the people that we want to be, we can't accept this. And it's just such a, you know, it's a hurdle. Like changing culture is just very difficult, right? That's why it needs a lot of work, like what you're doing.
Conversations too, you know, to have, conversations and spaces like Ifrah, what you do to have these conversations, because in the individuals that are now commenting, we have a good culture. I think they have never reflected. We need to have conversations that we all need to collectively reflect and changes.
And just saying that an aspect of our culture is not good doesn't mean that we're discarding the entire culture. There's also that misunderstanding too, that especially I feel sometimes women like yourself and I, Amira, we are said to be that we've discarded the culture, right? So any criticism that we may have is often not taken very well.
So I think, here is what I think. You and I are strong on our culture compared to others. I think those who are making these comments against us based on our appearance, actually, it's not that they even know us.
Yeah.
It's based on our appearance. I think those, I just don't listen to these kind of individuals, because that's they're coming from a space of judgmental. So so it's even hard to have conversations with them, but we still also need to educate them that Somalis are very diverse in terms of appearance. There's you and I, there's others that wear maybe hijab and other and these are options. Yes, it's a religion, but also it's a journey that everybody takes. We can't all be the same. We all have different lifestyles, different upbringing, and different journeys in our life. So one day we will get to maybe wearing hijab or they desire, but not who we are.
Absolutely. I really like you said, it's a journey, right? And it's a personal journey. So I reject a lot of times like people's imposition on my own personal journey, because I've spoken before on like the journey that I took to get to the point where I'm like, oh, I'm comfortable with who I am. So now I even resist even more anybody trying to distort me into something else. It's a personal thing.
Let me give you credit. You do it so well, You just show up yourself for who you are, and that's just so amazing. Thank you for doing that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Other than the negative comments, a comment here from Amo, what are other things that darker skinned women go through in the Somali community? So it goes like beyond just like Heblaya Adawe, Mr. Heblaya Amira Adawe, or whatever. Although those are really hurtful things to say. Don't say things like that to people. Don't even think them about people. But what are other consequences that they have for virtually being darker skinned women?
Yeah. So based on, and again, this is based on my research, is what I learned from those individuals, that people that participate in my research. So a lot of the women also talked about their likelihood of finding husband, also depends on their skin color. And so that overwhelmingly, most of them actually they talked about that, whether it's finding a boyfriend or whether it's finding a husband, or even retaining their husband once they have one. Talked about men being more attracted to a lighter skinned women. That's a huge factor too in our culture.
Okay. And it's so surprising though that earlier you said that it's something that we have gone through for a while now. But I love old Somali songs, and I listen to Somali songs all the time. And from what I remember and hear of them, a lot of times there's a praise for our darker skin. So what has happened to this shift, right? So what has caused this shift now?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So Somali has been always practicing for a long time skin lighting, many years ago, way before the Civil War.
Okay.
So Somali is very same as the rest of African countries where they have experienced colonization. There is had influence, just like here in the United States have those who went through slavery have experienced colorism. Americans that worked in that were darker, used to work outside. The lightest inside. Similarly, the colonizers, they use these kind of concepts in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. So in the case of Somalia, so some of these cultural practices that we have now, it's a colonial legacy. We have never actually, Somalia and other countries of Africa never went through decolonizing their minds. They always have focused on, and I can see why they have focused on this. They always have focused on like the economy.
Right.
Even that they have never decolonized. Also they put so much focus on their politics, and so Somalia, it never went through a moment of where we had cultural reflection or ethnicity. A lot of the people, even the elderly people, I mean, we're good at storytelling and all of that.
Yeah.
But those that had family that, like very strong in culture and history and identity, those have like more understanding of their identity and history. But we have never went through a history, learning our history, and also what parts of these histories were like bad for our culture or good. So we have never went through. So I don't know if with you, but I the Civil War happened. I think I'm older than you. So the Civil War happened when I was grade 5 or grade 6, I think. So like the history we used to learn, it was basically kind of a Western kind of history, the history we learn here. So as a young person growing up in Mogadishu and here, I don't see a history that I actually learned from Somalia going to school, except what I've learned from my family, You don't have family that's teaching you history and identities and all of that. You talked about listening to songs. Some people don't even listen to that. And so I think we have this huge gap of, during the Civil War is what happened is that, like people started getting, like learning more about the religion, than even their history of culture and identity. So what happened is that, and people who brought the religion, and even like these schools, like if you look at these schools now, it's influenced by the Wahhabism. I don't want to get into religion. I know they're very sensitive on that, but that's a culture that was introduced to them, and so for a lot of time. So like if you look at even in schools now, it's not in Somali. It's either in English or or Arabian. Like Arabian language, and so so you will see education. We never decolonized the education system.
Okay.
And we never learned our history and all of that. And then we're not like people that write, like we don't. So we lost a lot of really amazing historians, but they never left legacy of writing, like done and all of that. So I think so much, we need to learn on the history side and write about.
And I was thinking, as you were talking about history, I was wondering to myself, how accessible is that history? Who is the holders of history? And because we're an oral society, I mean, personally, I love the written word, right? And a lot of times the written word, because it's associated with colonialism, it gets a bad rap. But for the record, a lot of people other than the colonizers all over the world had a written system. right? So this isn't something that's particular to the colonizers. So there's also that association with the written word with colonizers that is a deterrent for us. It stands us in the way of even appreciating the written word. But the written word lives longer than we as human beings do. We have a short human lifespan, we move on. And we've lost so many libraries, right? And human beings that possess so much knowledge and that could have told us a lot more about who we are, asalka, right? But there's also the idea of culture being something that is fluid, that changes, and that we have along the way also borrowed culturally from other people. Where does it stop, do you think, in your opinion, like to kind of sidestep from colorism? Where do you think, in your opinion, does it stop being majority your culture and majority somebody else's culture?
So can you say more about that? You mean in the case of in the United States, like those who were born here but Somalis, like one point
that could be an example, sure.
But before I get to that, I just wanted to say something about the writing. So now there's so many tools to keep history. It can be even oral history,
right?
Where people can create podcasts and collect these and archive it, So it doesn't even have to be, we're not all good writers. That's fine. But there's that aspect of oral society, we are an oral society, so we need to keep that culture of being oral society too. But these other tools are available that people still right. So in terms of your question about how do people navigate cultures,
right? Because there's a lot of people who will argue that Somalis didn't lose culture. People will argue that Somalis found religion, and that's not a bad thing. So I want to know where does it end? Where does it end, or what's the fine balance of holding on to your cultural identity, or what makes your people who they are, and embedding religious values into that, where there isn't, you're not completely going over to the other side of, not to go completely to religion side, but a lot of the valuing of the Arabic language, or the valuing of Arabic, let's say attire, right? Can those things, for me personally, I think about it, can those things be considered Islamic, or are they out of culture, right? Which part of the cultures can we take for our spiritual wellness, and which can we say, oh, I already have something like that?
So I don't know those who are saying we found a religion now. I just don't understand that. We were always Muslim. We always had the Muslim values. I was brought up as a Muslim person, and so I don't know where that is coming from. But I'll say maybe people become more fundamental in the religion, and took different sides of the religion. But I'm not a religion, I'm not a person to comment on that. The right person.
Okay. And that's fair enough. Fair enough. What I would like to know, though, is in terms of us finding religion and maybe associating more with the Arab people that were, funding the schools that we now had after instability. Does that influence skin bleaching? Does that influence the trying to be like these people who are now, one, associated with religion, and two, associated with saving us, because they're coming into our country and they're building schools, and they seem to be nice people, right? Is there a desire to be associated with them and to be like them more?
That's an excellent point, and I think this has to come from the Somalis. So the education system now is overtaken by those, whether it's those who are from Saudi or other places, and so they're basically bringing their literature to Somalia, and this is not this is separated from Duksi or religion, Islamic schools. This is the normal public schools. And I think, Somali government, I think they're trying to address that. And I think what happened is that because during the civil war, we lost all of the literature that we had, the Somali literature in terms of books and all of that, and those who used to teach. And so I think it's a process that the country is going through, and I think every country that goes through a civil war and then civic unrest, all of that, I think goes through this kind of process. And I think, and this is why we need to focus on learning history and identity, and have those those who are running for political office or potentially will become ministers, like education minister and places like that, to really think about beyond learning. Learning comes in many ways, and then being mindful about what kids are reading. So I do training for public schools and charter schools in terms of colorism in classrooms.
Right.
Young people of color experience, and I always talk. Are you mindful about what kids are reading?
Right.
What are they learning? These kids are very smart.
Absolutely.
Yeah, what are you teaching them? The pictures that you're showing them, who are these pictures? Is it, like in your case, is it a guy who's wearing kameez? Like, because that's
not even the kameez. The kameez is okay. I was reviewing one time, and it wasn't because I was asked to. Somebody just tagged me into like this new Somali book, right, for children, and I was excited because I love the written word and I love publishing and all of that. So I was excited about the book. So I looked through it and I saw all of these Somali kids that were really light skinned, wavy hair, and I was like, are these Somalis? So I'm wondering about the dark-skinned Somali kid. I'm wondering about like me, if when I was younger, looking at that, what kind of association would I have been making in my brain? What kind of connections am I making in my brain? I don't look like that. Therefore, am I Somali? Am I good enough? Right? You're making these connections, and kids are very perceptive like that. As we go through life, we're making connections of what is okay, what is not okay, what is beautiful, what is not beautiful, right? So
absolutely, Frah, you're absolutely right. Beautywell, we have Young Women's Wellness and Leadership Initiative. So we recruit young girls from high school, who are in high school, from public school and charter schools. They're between the ages of 14 and 18. And these are the most smartest young Somali girls or young African girls, because it's open for.
I have seen that.
And that's what they talk about, because they said that they're not learning history in their homes. They're not learning people who look like them in books, in school. So these are some of the really huge issues that kids who are growing up here talk about, but also those who are in Somalia too, because they're basically, people sometimes ship books from here to Africa, and so people are coming from in a really good space. Good way of thinking, to build their learning and literature, all of that.
Curriculum.
Yeah, but they're not mindful about what you're sending to back home. What is it teaching them? It's showing them representation of like who they are, people who look like them in these books. So children books are really hard thing, and so far, Ifrah, you are right. I have looked at all the Somalis who have written children books, because now we're going to launch next year a project that will focus on positive parenting in terms of creating a toolkit of how parents should work on their young girls in terms of like self-esteem and color. And we want to include children book in that toolkit. And we have been doing literature review on these books, and I have noticed that there's a huge gap in even those who are writing children's books, how they even representing Somalis. That has a lot of questions too.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we have touched on many things, Amira, and I know we're, cutting into time, right? So one thing that I also wanted to just quick recap, we've talked about what colorism is, right? And how it impacts people directly in terms of their self-esteem. And I have talked in previous weeks about how self-esteem is connected to everything else in our lives, right? How we carry ourselves, how we interact with other people, the value we see in ourselves. So colorism has a direct correlation with the value we see in ourselves as human beings. And that can have really detrimental effects, right? We talked about how dark-skinned women, the consequences of just being born dark-skinned is not being able to find a romantic partner, not being able to keep a romantic partner, because men are said to be generally more attracted to lighter-skinned women. Now, this could be, to be honest, no fault of these men in particular, because they also live in this society. They also are breathing the smog of colorism. They're not immune to it. There's some guys that go outside of that, right? And say, I'm going to pick whoever I want to. But I believe in the back of their mind, they're still aware that this thing exists. What about in terms of jobs, in terms of, economically, how does it affect dark-skinned women? Economics.
Oh yeah, colorism. There's a huge association between colorism and economic well-being for Black women, especially in general, women of color. If you look at employment, when Black women or even a person of color in general, within people of color, especially Black people, during interviews, they don't get selected, or they're being perceived that they're not intelligent enough, and all of that because of colorism. And then also their pay rate, what they get paid when they start the job, it's way different than those who are darker Blacks compared to lighter skin Blacks. And then also when it comes to promotion, they don't get promoted as often. So it has huge economic consequences on them. But also, to your point about self-esteem, it impacts also the education of the person. Once self-esteem gets impacted, you are a teacher. I don't want to tell you that. You already know that, Ifra.
No, we need to hear it. No, Shek, we need to hear it.
So it really impacts their learning too, and through my research with public school and charter schools for young girls, some of the young girls I have talked to you said that at some point they have done, trafficking as a result of wanting to boost their self-esteem. And when I say trafficking, I mean sex trafficking.
Right.
And then also substance use. Are the things that will comfort you and short time maybe give you happiness. And that to anybody that has self-esteem issue but have experienced trauma.
Right. And I've definitely touched on that. The things that people do, the lengths that people will go to feel good again. To feel that they have value again. And, the fact that we have these societal issues that are contributing to people being sex trafficked, right? Because they're told constantly, because you are dark skinned, as a woman, especially, right? Somebody made a really, really excellent point. Let me go back to it. They said the reason Somali women bleach their skin to achieve light skin is because they want to be attractive to men. And since Somali's women's achievement is based on marriage, you can imagine what pressures they have that they are experiencing, right? So there's also the societal value of a woman. There's a lot of Somali literature on what a woman is and should be. But a woman, a gawarra, it's that kind of mentality also that puts some pressure on a woman to find a husband, even though maybe at first she just wanted to go to school, and maybe later on she would find a partner and it would just be the natural cycle of life. Now there's this intense pressure to have a husband before 25, otherwise you're expired. Right? We're putting expiration on a human being's worth.
Yeah, and the thing is that when people get pressured like that, they rush to, these kind of things like getting
Mhm.
married early, or maybe having kids way before they're even ready for it. And so that creates a lot of unhappiness. And I see
Mhm.
that a lot of married people who are very unhappy, and they can't leave their marriage because of the cultural reasons that we're talking about. And so I think that is also when it gets to individual level of actually thinking about their well-being. Because if you don't have well-being, of you are very unhappy, you're not gonna show up well to that family or the kids that you are raising. And so
Mhm.
this is when well-being becomes a priority for the individual. you know
Absolutely.
our society would always be like that. You get married, you have one child, and then people ask you the second child, and then you bring second child, and then the third child. So that will go on. But the individual, or the couple, they have to think about their well-being. And I think this is where Somalis who have learned, either who are therapists or family therapists especially, to intervene in the community to talk about these kind
Mhm.
of things that can, at some point, like coaching them about, how to have well-being in their marriage, or relationships in general.
Right, and like be very, specific on what like well-being means,
Mhm.
well-being doesn't necessarily mean like compromising who you are, and what makes you feel good about yourself. And obviously there's going to be negotiations in families and marriages, right? But the expectations that I have seen so far is that the women are expected to martyr ourselves. We're supposed to put our needs on hold. We're supposed to put our wants on hold for the sake, of the man and for the sake of the family. And this really isn't even particular to Somali culture. It's all cultures that put men above women, right? All patriarchal cultures believe that the men's needs and wants come before the women, right? So we have that aspect as well, right? So, and that leads to the kind of things that we're talking about in terms of like direct health consequences. Mira, what are the direct health consequences of skin bleaching?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let me say, skin lighting products are made out of like three ingredients, which are very toxic ingredients. There, so I want to understand people. There's no safe skin lighting, because people ask alternatives. So
Mm,
it's either made of hydroquinone, which is very toxic chemical that causes skin cancer. It also
mhm,
thins the skin, the skin layer, and so the person will become very sensitive to sunlight or
mm,
any heat. So they can't tolerate. So they will get the skin discoloration, all of that.
mhm.
And impact is there. Eventually people develop skin cancer. And
Right.
then mercury, it's a very toxic chemical. And Somalis in general use very high levels of mercury levels. Some of the
Mhm.
products that they use, that we test, contains like 200,000 parts per million, and the FDA threshold is 1 parts per million. So it's extremely toxic levels of mercury that are getting exposed to. And mercury causes neurological impact. So let me define what neurological impacts
Yes,
mean.
please.
Brain damage, basically. So
Mhm.
the mildest symptom that person can develop is seizure. But also seizure is not mild, but sometimes it gets to very severe neurological issues. So I'll give you an example. Now, since last year, September, there's Latinx women in California who use the skin lighting product from Mexico. She's still in coma. 1 year, she's still in coma. She damaged her brain permanently. So these are the type of severe that sometimes it can get to. But some people develop depression,
Mm.
very psychotic depression type of, and also a lot of anxiety. And so a lot of times what I tell Somali women is that they might be presenting these kind of symptoms, and then they might go to their doctor, and the doctor might not know how to screen, because they don't disclose that they use
Mhm.
skin products. Because here we do train healthcare providers to identify those who are using skin light and how to better treat them. But a
Right.
lot of times they don't disclose because there's a stigma associated with that. So sometimes they might show up at the clinic or the emergency room, have mercury exposure symptoms, but they might not say. So a lot of times depression, anxiety, and kidney impacts. You know, a lot of people have developed kidney diseases as a result of using mercury in skin lighting. So these are the things that we worry about, especially those who get exposed to mercury. And then they also use highly pollutant steroid, which they use like creams like dermaphyte, mofate, lemonade. So these are examples of like highly pollutant steroids. And usually steroids are medication. They're
Right.
used for only 2 weeks to address a skin condition, and then you have to be under supervision of doctors. So what they're doing is that, in Ohio, I'm sure you have Somali mall, so you can go there and buy now highly pollutant steroid and then mix
I have seen some things. Oh my God. I went to a store one day and this lady was just mixing up things and it had this stench. I worked in a chemistry lab. So I'm like, what is in that? So it's like, it's highly, like, it's so like pungent, right? So I asked, what are you doing? And she's like, oh, I'm just mixing up some creams. And I naturally asked, well, what is in them? Like, what are you mixing? And she just said, oh, I'm just mixing a bunch of things. Well, Addy, it's okay. Everybody uses them. Now she's going to turn around, and she's a business owner. She was going to turn around, actually, put those things in cubbies and sell them to people. So it's like, there isn't a label. You're not disclosing what's in there, what you've all put together. All of these chemicals actually could be could be interacting with each other in a worse way to create an entirely different compound. This is very, like, I'm thinking like highly illegal what you're doing.
That's what worries me. I'll get to that. With the steroid now, what I'm learning from some of the dermatologists is that we refer our clients to, saying that they developed addiction by overusing steroids. So steroids, again, it's a medication. So anytime you abuse medication, these are drugs. These, all of them have side effects once you overuse it. So they're developing addiction to the steroids. And so what the dermatologists are now doing is that to wean them off, like, slowly, to make sure that they stop it. Like, let's say if they were using every night, they're asking them to use 3 nights out of the week, and then slowly cutting it off.
Okay.
Otherwise, their body will crave for it, and so then you will see them externally getting damaged, and then also internally. That can be very huge. And then now, the part that I worry for Somalis a lot compared to other groups that we work with is that Somalis, they do like this secondary manufacturing of the product. So like mixing these multiple chemicals, and every one of them are now coming up with their own cream.
Right.
Mind you, and they don't hire toxicologists or people to actually formulate.
Right, like a chemist, like somebody needs to look at this and who knows what the different compounds mixed together create.
Yeah. Or even, and in the case of toxicologists, like to see what levels of these chemicals can impact people they're selling to. So I think, and I want people to understand, these come up with a lot of legal consequences. Somalis don't sue people, but at some point they will get to people who will sue them.
Absolutely, because if somebody has a very awful, like they experienced something so great, there's gonna be something is gonna come out of that, right? Speaking of, that can help. Do you create like literature in Somali language that talks about this?
Yeah, it's on our website. Yeah,
on the website. Okay, I will look at it and share it away.
Yeah, we will do it in all languages, actually. Yeah.
Yes. because this is it's this huge problem. And we've talked about like the social implications, what's like causing people. On a very, very final note, this is ongoing work, Amira. Inshallah, in the future, I would like to ask you back again to talk about this again, because this is something that's just, it's very important to me. It's very near and dear to me. And I think we need to find a resolution. The final note, what would you say to girls who are bleaching today?
Well, stop it. Stop using it, especially those of you so here is the other thing. When we tell people to stop, talk about mercury, they worry. So if anybody's listening to me today using these products, I will recommend them to stop using it. Those chemicals that are in their body will eventually come off their body. But if they continue to use it, it accumulates over time. And that's what impacts their health. And not only the health, but also you are disowning your religion, because this gets also to religion. So basically you're saying that I don't want how God created me. And so those who are religious also should keep in mind that this is also gets to the religion side and the culture that we were just talking about. You basically reducing your own identity and owning it. So I would highly recommend to just own who you are and think about, it's not only about you, think about your community, your family, and the whole society. And then most importantly, think about the environment that we live in, because all of these toxic products are ending up in the environment. So why do we even have to change our skin color? We're all beautiful. So I'll highly recommend that every young girl to really embrace who they are and just own their beauty and define your own beauty. There's one standard beauty.
Yes.
All different in our own ways.
We really truly are, we really truly are. And speaking of the skin, as a science teacher, I'm like, when you said you're taking away the layers of the skin, one thing, I went to school in Kenya, okay? Yeah. And I remember going to school in the beginning of the school year, and then by the end of the school year, some of my classmates did not look like my classmates anymore. They looked entirely different. Now, I was going through some things in my life at that point, and I'm not going to say I was really the brightest cookie, but the moment I was like, what are they doing? So when they would tell me it's makes your skin nice and, clean. And I look at my skin and I'm like, it looks nice and clean, and I also knew from science class that my skin is some of the things that stick. Okay. Our skin is our first line of defense. It's our first line of defense.
It is the organ of our body. Yeah.
Absolutely. Largest organ of our body, most protective. I mean, it does so many wonderful things for us. So the thought of doing any damage to my skin that was protecting me, I couldn't even imagine. I was like, nope, no, that was not going to work for me. And I'm so glad that is what stuck for me, because I'm telling you, at 15, 16, I was not the brightest cookie, and I was going through a lot of life stuff. So I might have been motivated by some of these things. And I remember talking about self-esteem a few weeks ago, and the kind of things, that people do to make themselves feel better. People are really susceptible to this. Young people, young women are really susceptible to this.
Very young. In terms of Kenya, my sister lives Kenya now, so I go there every year.
Yeah.
And one time I went there. There was a grocery store near my sister's house, and I went there, and then a section of the grocery shelves was advertising skin lighting products, and it said before going back to school. So here we think about school supplies and things like that, but that was actually targeting young girls to really
very specific, very deliberate.
Yeah. And that's what happens actually a lot of African countries and Asia. People are directly marketed to, these cosmetic companies. They know how to directly market to these communities, but also different age groups. And then the thing is that skin lighting practice, it does not depend on how smart the person is. Let me tell you, Efrah, I know very well educated women who use skin lighting products.
Mhm.
It has no education association, whether you are low in education level or high in education level.
Mhm.
It all depends on the self-esteem of the individual.
Absolutely.
And so a lot of times, people ask me, is it because of ignorancy that they do it? It's not, actually. I've seen
Yeah.
well-educated women who use skin lighting.
Right. Very unfortunate. Amira, thank you so much for your time today. Really, this is a conversation that is ongoing and that just really isn't finished in a day. I know the kind of, I can imagine the kind of work that you do. I don't know, I can imagine as such a humongous problem and the kind of work that it requires. So I just want to thank you very, very much for your time today. And yeah, thank you everybody else who's watching us, who's listening. Please share with everybody to love your skin and not put poison in your body. That's not only from a health consequence, it's also, a religious edict to not, do harm to your body. So thank you very much, Bayo.
Yeah, thanks for creating this platform. So thank you. Take care.
I appreciate you very much, Bayo. Thank you very much. And everybody, goodbye. And I will see you next time. Ma salam.